See you, commissioners. We have the president of the Nats Fan Club with us, I know, to keep us on track here. Thank you all for coming, and thank you again for all the schedule changes. I know it's really inconvenient for you, and sorry about the hour. Mr. Levchenko, do you want to kick us off and frame this annual discussion?
Sure. And it is new for Mr. Reamer, as new to the T&E Committee this year, and new for Mr. Glass, new to the Council this year. This is a unique spending affordability process for WSSC. Mr. Reamer has dealt with it at the full Council, but not at the level of detail that we get at it in the committee. You were on
4 years on
that's
T&E.
right. Oh,
Yeah.
how quickly we forget.
Returning veteran.
Oh, that's right. You're back.
In any case, I think we want an abbreviated version,
Right.
given the hour and our guest schedules. Thank you.
I've got a few slides that we can kick through very quickly, and then get to some of the discussion. But before I do that, I know WSC wanted to make a few comments. Ms. Reed, I believe, wanted a few opening comments, and Ms. Foster.
Well, given the hour of the day, I'll be extremely brief. Good afternoon, Chair Hucker. Good afternoon, Councilmember Reamer. Thank you for this opportunity to review our fiscal year 21 spending affordability limits. This budget has been a phenomenal budget because, of course, while we are a AAA bond-rated agency, we have AAA challenges. We have challenges in the first A of affordability, second A of aging workforce, third A, our aging infrastructure. And so we've worked very hard to address those three challenges.
A in messaging.
And what?
A in messaging, too, apparently.
A in messaging?
A in well-honed messaging.
Okay, well, I'll take that. Thank you so much. So, we've been working hard to work on our aging workforce by coming up with different models for succession planning, taking our 50 most critical positions and actually establishing a plan for what it might look like when the tenure of those most critical positions are actually ready to retire or otherwise leave WSSC. In terms of affordability, we have certainly added many more options to our portfolio to help customers who have to deal with rate increases. We are sensitive to those issues, and so we have instituted this year a PIPE ER program, which is a low-interest loan program for our customers. We continue to raise money to put in our water fund for customers who have difficulty paying their water bill, and right now we're in the last couple of years we raised over $800,000. This is the healthiest the fund has been since it actually was instated 25 years ago. And in terms of our aging infrastructure, we're always looking for innovative ways to make sure we address the challenges with our 101-year-old system. So I'll end with that. Thank you so much for your time, and we look forward to this presentation and answering your questions. Madam Chair, Vice Chair.
Push the...
Good afternoon. In light of the hour, I don't need to make a lot of comments. Obviously, Commissioner Bayonet and Commissioner Dennis and I are all here to support the staff with the excellent job that they are doing. I did want to take a couple of moments and just to thank Keith for the excellent job that he's done on the analysis. His work is always A+, and we're always happy with it. I think his recommendation is a good one. We're glad that the county executive is endorsing it, and we hope you guys will do the same. Thank you.
Thank you.
Real quick, just to provide a quick summary before we get into some of the details. There are 4 limits that are part of this spending control limits package. The maximum average rate increase, which focuses on the volumetric rate that customers pay, not the fixed fees. Those are dealt with separately. Debt service, which is a major element of the operating budget. New debt, which obviously drives future debt service. And then the total water and sewer operating expenses, which encompasses debt service as well as all the other costs within the operating budget. The schedule, real briefly, the Bi-County Work Group, which I'm referencing here, is a staff work group with Montgomery and Prince George's council and executive staffs getting together with WSSC staff. The base case that's mentioned in the packet, that I'll get to in a minute, represents WSSC staff's work. I did want to make clear that the commissioners, while they keep abreast of the issue, do not formally vote on the spending control limits at any time. However, they ultimately obviously have to vote on the budget that will be coming over early next year, and that will have to meet the limits that the two councils agree to. We had a public hearing on September 24th. The Prince George's County T&E Committee met late last week and had more of a Q&A type of briefing. They're going to be meeting again next week. I did want to note that we have heard from the Prince George's staff that they will be recommending a 7% package to their committee. We can't speak to what the committee will do, but at least at the staff level, that's what we've heard from them. And then, of course, our discussion was going to be yesterday. It's today. We will then work with our Prince George's counterparts to come to agreement before we take final action by the end of the month. The spending control limits history is in the packet. I don't want to dwell on it other than it goes back to FY96. And the approved limits are not necessarily indicative of what the final rate will be, or the rate or the other limits in what's approved by both councils in May. And there are several examples on that chart showing actual lower budgets than the limits that were approved in the fall process. It is considered a ceiling, but it does not, it limits WSSC as to what the councils expect to see, but it does not limit the councils to go either below or above. I've got a lot of information on cost trends. I'm not going to dwell on this either, but if council members do have questions during our later discussion, we may reference some of this. I do want to note, overlaying all of this, and one of the reasons why we do see rate increases on that prior slide that are above inflation, one of the main reasons is the dominating source of revenue for WSSC is revenue from its volumetric fees, and that in turn is based on customer demand, and water production, which is reflecting customer demand, is actually flat. It's been flat for the last 20 years. That's due to probably many factors, but one of them certainly is energy conservation and the water conservation element of that. Customers are using less water per capita. In fact, during this 20-year period, we've had a growth of about 24% in WSSC's population served, but the actual water usage is actually down a little bit. It's been up and down over the years, but it's basically flat over the 24 years, maybe even down somewhat. So that is indicative of a very positive result in terms of water conservation. On the financial side, though, that means WSSC is collecting significantly less revenue than it otherwise would. And under its old rate structure, we're now under a new rate structure, but under its old rate structure, that was magnified because customers paid at the highest rate where they fell in their average daily consumption. So it was magnified under that. So this creates an unusual or unique fiscal pressure that, for the most part, Montgomery County has not had to deal with. If you look at the equivalent side on our end, maybe looking at property taxes, it's unusual for our assessable base to decline in a given year. And actually our property taxes are only about a third of our revenue sources. 87% of WSSC's revenue is coming from volumetric rates, and those are not delivering increases in years. They're actually showing a decline in revenue, and so that has to be made up in rates. I did mention that we're under a new rate structure. I've just put it up here real briefly. Unlike the old rate structure, customers pay through the tiers for their usage. So the first 80.9999 gallons is at one rate. The next tier of gallons is at the second rate, and so forth. So it eliminates some of that volatility of customers moving between tiers that can also cause revenue fluctuations for WSSC. Now, the spending control limits themselves. The base case that I had mentioned that WSSC staff came up with is on this slide. It assumes an 8% rate increase for the upcoming fiscal year. It's actually a multi-year presentation, which is in the packet. We obviously have to focus on the first year, but we look at those out years as well. And there are several years of that 8% assumed before it declines again. And there's lots of inputs and assumptions in that. I'll try to touch on a few of those that I think are important to the committee, but there's a lot of data in the packet that we can refer to if necessary. The 8% rate increase also then flows into these other limits in terms of new debt. The new debt and debt service under this scenario is consistent with WSSC's recently transmitted capital improvements program that the council will be taking up early next year. So that's one major assumption in this. And then total water and sewer operating expenses, there's a number of assumptions with regard to that, which I'll touch on very briefly. I mentioned the debt service and the fact that that's assumed in the CIP. There's also an assumption of PAYGO, and this is really serving two purposes. Just like with the county's PAYGO, a portion of it is intended to offset debt service and try to keep debt service at a manageable level. Historically, under the spending control limits process, we've tried to keep WSSC's debt service at or below 40% of their budget. Now that sounds quite high, which it is. It's much higher than the county's debt service levels, but it's more expected in an organization, a utility like WSSC, where much of their activity is industrial and involved in very capital intensive. But the PAYGO is also intended to address some urgent issues they have with regard to infiltration and infill issues with regard to its Piscataway wastewater treatment plant. And I've noted that in the packet. They had significant capacity issues at the plant over the past year in 2018 and part of 2019. The committee may recall that we had historically high levels of rain during that time. And as pipes can leak out, they can also leak in. So a lot of stormwater can get into those pipes, and it created significant capacity issues at the plant. And WSSC feels that in addition to pipe replacement, there's also a significant amount of maintenance work that needs to be accelerated in that area, and that's assumed in this base case scenario in their PAYGO assumption. So that's also a significant assumption this year. Some of these other issues here are more common that we've seen from year to year. Employee compensation, which the two councils have agreed to make comparable to their office employee compensation, and that's something we look at each spring based on the contracts that are up and what the assumptions are coming over from the executives each year. We also assume inflationary increases in current programs. There's a 2% assumption built into this base case, which is similar to past years. We have regional disposal costs, which are a formula charge from DC Water based on flows. This is the increase they're assuming in FY21 for that. And then finally, as I mentioned earlier, funds available. This gets at the volumetric rate issue and also use of fund balance. Those numbers are down a bit. WSSC had to write off some revenue loss last year, and that has to be made up in rates. I talked about that earlier. And then within the base case, WSSC has also recommended some additional funding for potential additional and reinstated programs. These are programs that WSSC may have done at one time, or they do now, but look to accelerate or increase. Generally, they're best practices that they would do if resources are available. These are some issues we have dealt with later in the budget process and move forward when the two councils have agreed. It's still a little early this year. We don't have a budget even before us yet. But in WSSC's base case, they have assumed some allowance for that. And this chart basically puts it all together in how you build to that 8% rate increase, progressively up from the changes in funds available, debt service, pay-go, and so forth, all the way down. So now we get to the options. And you heard earlier the executive's recommendation and council staff's recommendation was for a 7% rate increase assumption. And what that means would be, and I note here on the slide in front of you, each 1% rate increase adds about $6.5 million in revenue to WSSC's budget. So a 7% rate increase would mean about a $6.5 million assumed reduction, if you will, in the budget. That would be most of what you saw earlier in those additional and reinstated programs. So there'd be a little bit left over for that, but for the most part, they would have to find savings within their budget or other assumptions that maybe were higher in order to find the resources to do some of that additional work. But staff will note that historically, with the spending control limits, the councils, both councils, I would say, have generally, while recognizing that we are in a above inflationary increased period, we are still trying to encourage WSSC to work within its base, especially to find dollars for additional work that it feels it needs to do. The 7% is about where that gets you, and that's where the executive was, and that's where council staff is today. I think, yeah, and this chart actually shows how the new numbers would look, and these are staff's numbers. We would work with WSSC to finalize a 7% model, so these numbers might wiggle a little bit, but they're pretty close. And as you can see, I also included the residential customer impact at several different daily consumption levels to show. The increases are actually a little bit lower than the rate increase, and that's because you have fixed fees that are not assumed to change, that are built into the bill. So the numbers are a little bit lower percentage-wise for those bill increases. So that's all staff has in terms of background. We have lots of folks at the table here that can answer questions for WSSC, and staff's also happy to elaborate further on staff's recommendation.
Thank you. Any comments from the panelists? I didn't see any lights. So. Did Mr. Levchenko say it all correctly? Wonderful. Okay. Any comments from my colleagues? Mr. Reamer.
Okay. Well, I wish we didn't have to approve a rate increase, but the reality is, with many factors, including improving efficiency, it's just something we're continuing to have to confront. So I think I'll concur with the council staff's recommendation. Wanted to congratulate you on hiring Al Rashdi. I don't know if I feel like you are the place where everyone goes, you know. So that's good. That's good for WSSC. It's good for the county. You know, a lot of our best people are with you, and so it gives us a lot of confidence, and appreciate that.
Thank you, Councilmember Reamer. We really appreciate having those great resources and, you know, the addition of the talent and skills that they bring to our team. And WSSC is a place where people can thrive, and we really have innovation built into our DNA. And we're hoping that one day we won't have to bring you any rate increases, because our innovations will create another stream of revenue that will offset some of the debt and rate increases. And we can't do that without really good people.
This is true. I know, Dr. Foster, that's a big part of your portfolio, I think, right? The innovation component. And an issue I just wanted to keep before us. We had a huge presentation today about the regional housing goals and how the region must create 320,000 units of housing in the next 12 years, and how the county is a big piece of that. You know, we've got to probably double our housing production in the county. I understand the conversations are continuing about Littonsville. So I hope that you'll bring your innovative thinking to finding solutions there, because it's something that the council really put a lot of effort in to envision a big, bold solution right on the purple line. And, you know, we got out there on a limb, and we need everybody to try to help us figure out how to bring it home. So just wanted to ask, is there any update on that? Is that conversation? I had heard that you were recently involved in some meetings about it. May not have been you directly, Ms. Reed, but I don't know.
Well, no, it hasn't been me directly, Councilmember Reamer, but we are still open to options that the county, HOC, and its developer will bring forward for us to consider. As you know, the current option that's on the table was not as viable as we had all hoped it would be. So we're looking forward to hearing other options and alternatives and considering those.
Hopefully we'll get to a solution. Thank you.
Councilmember Glass.
Thank you. So this being my first time going through the spending limit conversation, in the packet I see the historical rate increases and limits, and clearly see that there was a period of time when there was much more constraint, and then that constraint burst open. And so I presume that the levels in the early, starting in 2009 essentially, and going for a few years thereafter, were a direct result of what I'll say was the drought, budgetary drought in the years prior. And so what I like about now, if there's anything to like about any rate increases, is the moderate tone of them. Clearly, it's not nothing like in some years, but it's not 9.9% that were in 2011 or 12 or so forth. So I think that's good. The one question I will ask you, though, in your budgetary forecast, are there any new marketing plans that you might be devising?
No?
Good to hear. Thank you.
Okay, well, you know, after DC rebranded itself, I thought it was a positive. You know, I thought it was helped communicate a new kind of thinking. So I don't know. I feel like some people jumped all over you for wanting to get, you know, to kind of rethink how the public perceives you. But I think how the public perceives you is really important. And, you know, the role that you play as a service provider is something that people need to, you know, understand clearly. And maybe it needs to be refreshed. Fresh water is something we all believe in. So, you know, I think a little politics was played at your expense on that one, frankly. But, you know, I trust you'll figure out how to make it work, maybe at a pace that everyone can absorb. But I did want to ask, what's the latest on the meters? I know we had some discussion about that.
Are we talking about the advanced metering infrastructure?
Yeah, there was a big discussion, I think, recently, and just any quick update you could provide.
I'm going to defer to our Deputy General Manager of Operations, Jay Price, to come and give us update on that.
Does not need to be lengthy,
Right.
just a quick, yeah.
RFP is actually on the street right now, so that's all I can say about it.
The RFP for the whole program.
That's correct. Looking at the different options and different prices coming back.
And you did not decide not to allow people to opt out?
We have not made that decision yet.
Okay, fine. I don't think that's a good idea, personally. Just wanted to say that. Okay, thank you.
since we've engaged in the conversation about media and outreach and rebranding, I will share I will elaborate a little more on my thought. And the thought is public utilities show their value and demonstrate their worth when they do their work well and keep their budgets constrained. That is how public utilities prove themselves. Rebranding efforts might be fine and good, but that's all they are. They're just rebranding, and it's just paint and just names. And it means nothing unless the work of that monopoly is good. And I'm not using that in a bad way. WSSC is a monopoly. It's public monopoly because we can't get our water from anyone else. It's just a technical definition. And so keep doing your work. Keep doing it in the budget guidelines that we're providing. And thank you.
That is our number one goal. We, in 101 years of our existence, have never had a single water quality violation, and that is that's the quality that we always aim for. WSSC may be a monopoly, but that is not the attitude that I want our employees to embrace. I want them to treat our customers as if our customers have a choice. Meaning that if they had a choice and they weren't happy with us, they would walk away. And we don't want our customers to lose confidence in us, and they at least, feel like they're heard and valued. And actually, we've been WSSC Water since 2002 in our email address and in our website address. And this effort was to bring it full circle. That's one thing that it was to do. The other thing is that as we sell the innovations that we come up with, that we get patented, we're not operating just in this regional space. We're operating in the national and international space. So that was also a consideration that we had to keep in mind when we were getting the feedback that we did with our focus groups that told us how they viewed us as their local utility.
Thank you. Can you elaborate a little bit, Ms. Foster, on the timeline for any kind of savings around the innovation you described, or Ms. Reed?
Okay. Well, the timeline, I don't know if we've sketched it all out, because we have a business development manager who is, testing the market on some of those proposed ideas. The other thing is that we're looking to see if those ideas are patentable. Not sure exactly when all that return on investment, because it's a really new program. And we actually set up a department that's focusing on innovation because we embrace it as one of our core values. So I would like to come back with you as we continue to march down the road and get some more specific details on that. What I can tell you is that sort of in the frame of innovation, it's not just about tools and technology, but it's also about processes. And one process that we have instituted is strategic sourcing. And what that does for us is it gets us to look at the landscape on all different kinds of things, including chemicals and vehicles, to see how we can bring down our costs on that. And the program has been in place for quite some time. Keith probably knows better than me how many years the strategic sourcing program, 2013 is when it was first instituted. And in the last how many years, Patty, have we had the millions of...
I think, excuse me, for the record, Patty Callahan, CFO. I think when you go back and look at cost avoidance and cost reduction, it's about $92 million overall. Just getting the teams together and looking at different ways of buying and sourcing and using chemical use and different chemicals. So it's quite impressive.
Right, and we've discussed some of that. I appreciate all that, and I certainly appreciate the savings this year on the heat, light, and power. That's terrific. I always have this feeling in this hearing at this time, like we don't give this analysis, we sort of give it short shrift, it feels like. Maybe it doesn't feel like that to you, but to me it always feels like we're sort of rushed into this and we have a budget deadline and a deadline to get our recommendation to Prince George's and other things. And I really would like to find some time to hear, maybe in a smaller group and not at 5:30 at night when we have other events to get to tonight, but about a lot of the possibilities in this area, because I got to say, I don't want to belabor the point, we've talked about it many times publicly and privately. I'm not excited about the 7% increase, and I'm not excited about the sort of routine significant increases that we've become accustomed to approving. And I don't love having the choices before us be 7% or 8%. I wish we had a none of the above, because I think our constituents and your ratepayers, they stop me on the street, stop me in the grocery store all the time to complain about their water bills, not the quality and not the customer service and not many other things, but just the cost. And I know how you've measured up in the benchmarking study, and we've discussed this many times, but in terms of just the pain people are feeling when they're dealing with other cost drivers that are growing far above the rate of inflation, like childcare, like college educations, like their rent, they're having a really hard time paying their water bills, which is not an option for them. So, I really would welcome any opportunity to work with you to drive some of those costs down. I know most of your costs are fixed and there's a lot of decisions outside of your control, but when our constituents and your ratepayers see 7% again, explaining why that is and all these factors outside your control isn't a satisfying answer to them at all. So I hope we can bore down on some of the restructuring you might need to do or innovative efforts that you have in mind, because it always feels like they get sort of short shrift in this discussion. Will you be, I don't know if you have any comment on that. You don't have to.
None, but we would be happy to have a more detailed conversation and outline where we think we're going.
Okay, yeah, maybe not even happy, but sure, we can have it. What is your current posture on whether you will again seek state authority to have a variable rate structure by customer class?
No time in the foreseeable future, because we have to let the current rate structure settle in. To change it every year is quite unsettling. We just built a new billing system
Sure.
that had to incorporate this. So at least get through this fiscal year before we would consider doing that.
Sure. I mean, and to be clear, I'm not recommending changing your rate structure, which obviously took years now to get through that whole tortuous process and get approved, but just seeking the authority from our 24 delegates and our 8 senators and our colleagues in Prince George's to give you the authority to do what PEPCO does and do what every electric utility does and have a different rate structure for commercial customers and residential customers, so that single moms with 3 kids aren't paying the same rate as a limousine washing service, to me is just the fair and progressive and right thing to do. And regardless of the results in previous legislative sessions, I think that's something we ought to embrace, and I'll do my best to get the council and the county exec and others, my former colleagues in the state legislature behind that, because I really think we need to move in that direction, and there's no reason you shouldn't have that authority. And I hope you'll join me in that, because I don't think it's going to move without your support.
Well, it's certainly something that we'll have a conversation about. I understand it is just enabling legislation.
Right.
And
Enactment would be over a year away anyway, right?
we will get back to you and work with you on it.
Okay. So with that, do we have a motion for the 7, I guess? Second. Keith? Without objection? We good?
Yeah, just to note, as I mentioned, the numbers will wiggle a little bit when I get the final 7% model from WSSC, but you'll see numbers very similar to what you see on your screen right now.
Very similar or less, as you reminded us, it's a ceiling, and
Oh,
we're-
yeah,
we-
no,
we-
in
we
terms
would-
of next year. I'm
we would
talking
be-
about for the, when we go to the council,
For
the
the
next
council,
step, the
yes.
next step in the process will be to reach out to the Prince George's Council and staff and try to come to agreement.
Yeah.
Like I said, I think we're pretty
We've
close,
reached
although
out.
we don't know exactly where the TIEE committee is, since they haven't publicly
I think they'll
talked about
concur.
rates. But, so we're looking at, by the end of the month, we'll finalize resolutions at both councils.
Okay. Thank you all so much for bearing with our crazy schedule.